Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Trisha told me I shouldn't start speaking until people had a chance to, get situated and get your audio working. So we're very, very excited to be hosting this event with national political strategist Simon Rosenberg. For those of you who regularly come to CEBV events, happy hours, special events, you'll see a few differences about how we're handling this one. We normally focus on state politics, as everyone knows. That's our specialty. But tonight we are going to talk national politics. And we're going to do it as a way to start framing the discussion around Arizona. So we'll start with national politics. We'll move on to some Arizona subjects, and we'll be able to see them through that lens. Second, we'll be talking about the Democratic Party. And as many of you know, most of you know, civic engagement beyond voting is nonpartisan. And that does not mean we are neutral, and it doesn't mean that we are bipartisan. We are not. We have a perspective. We are progressive. We are under the indivisible umbrella. And when Democrats align with our values, we support them, and they often do. Thirdly, and it really pains me to say this, we have closed our chat for this event. We usually have such an incredibly lively and fun chat, but we have so much ground to cover and only an hour to do it. Mr. Rosenberg has been incredibly kind to schedule at 9 p.m. on the East Coast. So we want to be respectful of his time and everyone's time, and we're going to stay focused on the questions that we have prepared in advance, as well as some that were submitted by you. So with all that said, if you don't normally come to CEBV events, welcome. We are thrilled to have you here. We hope it won't be the last time. We'll be very, very busy over the next couple of years with a lot of calls to action, a lot of events, a lot of conversations like this. So please continue to look for our emails and pay attention to what we're working on. So with that said, welcome, Simon Rosenberg. We are so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. And so hopefully people have read about your background, but can you talk a little bit about how you got started in this political strategy business? And then as a follow-on to that, considering all the time you have spent in the trenches of, of politics, how do you stay hopeful? Your Substack is the Hopium Chronicles.
Yep.
Somebody will be dropping that link in the chat. And as we know, people read your work very avidly to stay hopeful. So how do you hold on to that?
Well, great questions. I, like a lot of people who got involved in politics, stumbled into it. I wasn't one of those who thought I was going to run for president when I was in 8th grade. And, I've never sought elective office myself. I started my career after college working for ABC News and as a producer writer in New York and the national network. And, I thought that's what I was going to do. And, but, Reagan had come along and it was the late 80s. And I got a chance to go work on some presidential campaigns and did that. And, the key is, all of you who've worked in campaigns know, it matters if you win or lose, right? And whether you stay in the business. And I lost on the Dukakis campaign and went back into the TV news business. And I worked with a woman named Linda Ellerby, who some of the folks here will know. She was my writing teacher in network news. And I learned how to, by working in network news, which is spoken English, I learned a lot about what became the work I did in politics and how politicians speak, because I was taught how to write spoken English and not written English. And politics is really a game of spoken English. The other thing I learned a lot at ABC News about was demography and ratings, and how to analyze ratings and demographic trends in the country. And these were things that I worked on there. And I don't think I really understood until very recently how important and informative that was for me. And a lot of this analysis that I do and the sort of data focus that I have really came from my time working at ABC. And then finally, I was part of the Clinton campaign in '92. I was one of the first people on the campaign. I was the communications director in New Hampshire. It was a lark. Nobody thought he could win, right? Bush was in the '90s and whatever it was. And, Clinton to me was a powerful new voice. And I was lucky enough to have been on that campaign, and we won. And 30 years later, I have a mortgage and kids in DC and have made a life here. And so it's been a lot of fun, and I've worked really hard and had a lot of great teachers along the way that have helped me understand politics. But a lot of what I think has happened recently has just been that I've been in this for 30 years full time, and I've seen a lot, and I've been in the game and was able to sort of withstand some of the BS and the stuff that was the noise around us, and stayed focused on the data and the election that I was seeing. And thank God the election I was seeing, right, was the one that happened for all of us. And then what was the second part of your question, Kathy? And by the way, can I just say thanks to all of you? It's really great to be here. I was telling Kathy and the team earlier that I've spent a lot, my wife's from New Mexico, and we vacationed and spent a lot of time in Arizona. It's one of my favorite places in the world to visit and to spend time there. And I've done political work there on and off for over 20 years. And so it's just great to be with all of you. And I also just want to say congratulations. I mean, you're arguably been the most successful Democratic state in the country in recent elections. It's hard to believe how far you've come so quickly, given where things were even just in 2016, right? If you can think of what you've been able to do. So just really grateful for the work that all of you have done, the success that you've had. It's been inspirational. When I talk to red states, or I gave a big talk in North Carolina 2 weeks ago to 300 people, and they said, what can we do? And I said, you have to learn from Arizona and Georgia. I mean, they're your models of how you have to replicate, what they did in your state. And so, you've become a model for many other people around the country. And so thank you for what you've done. Anyway, that I'm sure there was a second part to the question, but we can keep going, Kathy.
The second part was about hope.
Yeah.
After all of this bare knuckles campaigning, how do you stay hopeful?
In some ways, staying hopeful is the only way you can stay in this business, right? I mean, there's so many reasons in politics, and all of you are facing down, extreme MAGA folks every day, is that the hope is the only way to keep going. And I think that, and I worked for Bill Clinton, and he was the man from Hope. I mean, literally, he grew up in Hope, Arkansas. It's hard. When I learned that, I thought it couldn't really be true, right? But it was true. And he always believed that optimism was a Democratic superpower, that optimistic Democrats couldn't get beat. He believed in the power of optimism. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow, right? Was his theme song. And so I sort of grew up in the business under somebody who was a relentless optimist, and believed in the power of hope and optimism, right, as a mechanism to motivate and connect with people. But what happened last cycle, and I want to talk about this for a minute because it's sort of very foundational, I think, to everything that we're about to all go do together for the next couple of years, is that the way I was hopeful because I was hopeful based on the data that I was seeing. I wasn't, I was always hopeful and scared if MAGA won, and if this was a bad election for us. We all feel, the reason we're all here is we feel, one bad election means that our democracy can slip away, and that's why there's this massive grassroots that's built up all around the country. You're part of it, but it's everywhere. I mean, there's been this explosion of citizen activism across the country. Our campaigns now are raising vastly more money than they ever raised before because of all of you. In many of the races in 2022, we outraised our opponents by 4 to 5 to 1. It's never happened before. And those large campaigns are allowing us to not only control the information environment in the battleground states where we build these big campaigns, but it's also allowing us to drive turnout to the upper end of what's possible. And as you know, that's coming from both the size of the campaign, but also because of the sophistication of the tools that we have now to reach voters, the remote texting, the remote phone calling, the canvassing operations, the data management that we all have is allowing us to now go and reach second and third tier GOTV targets that we could never reach before. And, in the early vote in 2022, we actually did better in the early vote in this election that was supposed to be so bad for us than we did in 2018 and 2020. And that's because this grassroots muscles that are being built in this time of crisis for the country is becoming bigger and stronger every election. It's becoming, it's like a muscle that's getting worked. And so it's growing more powerful. And you could see that in the early vote. I mean, Tom Bonnier and I, when I was doing my analysis, and I should say that from October 15th to election day, my Twitter feed received 100 million views, right? Which is just an incredible thing to even think. I was getting 8 to 9 million views a day on Twitter in those final few weeks. It was a phenomenon, right? It was just crazy. But it was because the data was telling us that this was a close competitive election. And part of what Tom and I did is we expanded the understanding of what you looked at in an election. I can get more into that. But on the question of hope, let me just say 2 things. One is that when I talk about hopium became sort of a joke during the campaign because I was accused of having hopium, and it was a slur, right? It was a derogatory attack on me by Nate Silver and Amy Walter from the Cook Report, quote, used it against me in a New Yorker article in August. And it was sort of delusional. And I've repurposed the word for our purposes. And for me, hopium is hope with a plan. It's the ability to look at something and do work that changes the future, that changes the outcome. We together turned this election into a close competitive election. We didn't settle, we didn't just hope, right? We hoped, but then we did the work. And then we ended up having a better election than anybody anticipated. That didn't just happen, we did it together. And so for me, hopium is this belief that you can take the hopes you have and then make them real. And because we just did it together and we have to keep doing it together. But my hope was based on data and an election that we were seeing starting in May of last year. And I can go into the details, but it was an election that we saw that was a close competitive election, not a wave. And by this late summer, I was able to have moved most of the political punditry class away from the wave concept to something that was more close competitive. Obviously, Dobbs and what happened with abortion was critical to all of this, but it wasn't just that. It was more than that too, right? It was this general fear of MAGA, which is the most powerful force in our politics today that keeps driving our elections. It drove 2018, 2020, 22. It's been critical to our incredibly strong performance in Colorado, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin just in the last few weeks, right, where we've had really strong performance in those elections. And so what I was seeing in the data was a close competitive election. We saw it in the House specials that happened right after Dobbs. There were 5 House specials all across the country. We outperformed our 2020 numbers. We saw it in the Kansas referendum. Tom Bonnier found it in the voter registration numbers, which became universally more Democratic in every state in the country. You never see data, things like that move. Dobbs was like a bomb that went off in the election, changed voter registration data. We saw it in the donations we were getting, and we saw it in the early vote. And so when I went into election day, I was like, hey, I know there's a lot of noise out there, but the election we're seeing is a close competitive election, not a wave. And part of the reason we ended up all believing again that a wave was coming is that the Republicans flooded the zone with these fake bad polls that pushed the polling averages down and created a false impression about what was happening in the election. And so there was, out and out manipulation by Republicans. And as I used to tell reporters, if they lie, if they spent the last 2 years lying about the last election, they may be lying about this one too. And they were. And there was no red wave. And in fact, what happened on election day was the opposite of a red wave, right? It was our strong performance that really dictated the outcome. If I can say one last thing, in the battleground states, including Arizona, right, we outperformed our 2020 numbers in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Minnesota, Michigan, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania. We got to 59% in Colorado, 57% in Pennsylvania, 55% in Michigan, 54% in New Hampshire. You know that Mark Kelly had an incredible performance in Arizona by historical margins, winning the governorship, an unimaginable thing, right? So we, in a year that was supposed to be terrible for us, high inflation, low Biden approval, midterm dynamics, we actually improved our standing in most of the battleground states, meaning that the Republican hill to climb is now higher than it was in 2020. But the admonition to that, right? The worry is that where we didn't build these big campaigns and all the work that you did in places like New York, Florida, Texas, and California, we fell back. And it's a reminder that, there's still this right-wing noise machine that drives the daily discourse in the United States, still very, very powerful. And so we not only, in my view, have to do the work we keep doing on these campaigns and exercise, Kathy, these big muscles that we're all building together, that you're helping build. But we also have to get louder and to close the loudness gap with them. And all of you in Arizona know very well about the power of right-wing media, right? and right-wing institutions to be able to drive daily discourse. We have to learn how to get louder. And I think that if I can just say this, then we'll jump on, is that, because this is kind of the core of my narrative, and before people may have to run off, I want them to hear this, is that getting louder to me means that recognizing that if Tucker Carlson was reaching 3 million people a night, imagine if the 1 million or 2 million people who are doing grassroots work during the election cycle, giving money, doing the postcards, doing the text canvassing, also reach 10 of their friends every day with positive information about the Democratic Party and Joe Biden. 1 million people times 10 is 10 million people. That's 3 times as many people as Tucker Carlson is reaching. And so I think we have to start developing strategies for how to get louder together, to view us as, when I was in the war room 31 years ago, when we think of the war room, it's like 20 sweaty kids drinking Red Bulls, producing videos every day. We need to think of the war room as 1 million, 2 million people going, network, amplifying content, spreading good messages. And I think that we have much more agency and power here than we understand. We get louder in campaigns really well. We also have to get louder in the 24/7, 365 daily discourse where the Republicans are focused on, to help close this loudness gap with them, to make us, to ensure that we have the kind of election next year that we want to have. I'll be shorter in my answers now, Kathy.
Oh, no, that's totally fine. I really appreciate you making the points that you feel that we need to hear. And I love that message. We are a grassroots group, of course, and that is our stock and trade, is reaching out to as many people as we can and helping them express themselves. So that is music to my ears. To sort of switch a little bit.
Sure.
You recently wrote about Biden's ratings on the economy and that the ratings are very misleading. And you gave lots of data in one of your posts about why we should really believe that the economy is doing great. And this is where emotions and facts can take a different, they can go, there's a fork in the road. So why do you feel that polls are not reflecting what they should be reflecting? Are we asking the wrong questions? I mean, should we be reformatting what we look at? And something that drives me crazy and has for many years, why do Republicans get such good marks on the economy when they are absolutely the worst stewards of the economy that they could be?
Well, and this is a really, really important question, because if I could wave my magic wand to do 2 things this year that will make it more likely that we win next year. One would be to dramatically improve our standing on the economy. And the other one would be to launch a national voter registration drive for young people to drive youth performance and youth turnout through the roof in 2024. Those are the 2 things that I think, if we can do those 2 things this year, we're much more likely to have the election we want to have next year. And let's talk about the economy for a second. I have a presentation on my Substack, and it's free if you want to become subscribe to Substack, called "With Democrats, Things Get Better." And it's a presentation I've been doing on and off for a few years, which goes through data from 1989 to today on the economy and lots of other things. And part of the premise of this is that it's my belief that one of our strategic goals as a family has to try to establish this basic fundamental truth that when we're in power, things get better. The economy grows, the deficit goes down, there's American progress. When they're in power, we see repeated recessions, higher deficits, American decline. And this sort of fundamental contrast between us being sound stewards of America when we're in power and them being a repeated wrecking ball is, to me, this essential contrast that we have to try to establish. We have to reject what's called symmetry, this idea that there's a left and a right and we're equally virtuous and equally full of vice. I mean, that's obviously fundamentally untrue. And every time that any institution tries to create this symmetry between left and right, they're overselling the Republicans and underselling us. And so it's really important to try to create a more accurate understanding of what's happened in America since 1989. And I'll give you a few statistics, right? Since 1989, there have been 49 million jobs created in America. 47 million of them have happened under Democratic presidents, basically all of them. Under Joe Biden, just in the last few months, we've seen the lowest peacetime unemployment rate since World War II, the lowest unemployment rate since 1969, meaning that probably 2/3 of Americans have never lived in America where the unemployment rate is as low as it is today. We've seen the lowest uninsured rate ever recorded, the lowest poverty rate ever recorded. We had the strongest recovery in the G7 of any economy. Real wages are up. Inflation is coming down very rapidly. Deficits have come way down since Trump was president. And if you just look at the economic data, what's as clear as day is that we do a good job and they don't. And we can get into the whole history of why I think that is. And I write about this a lot on my Substack. But we've really gotten to a point where the economic conversation in this country is what I call red wavy, right? It's as false and wrong as the red wavy story was, the red wave was in 2022, because I think the right has become a negative sentiment machine. The right in the United States wants us to think badly of our democracy, of our country, the American project, our leaders, our institutions, each other. It's pumping enormous amounts of negative sentiment into our discourse every day. Trump gave the famous Carnage speech in 2017 at his inaugural, where it was all about how crappy America was and all the things that was wrong and bad about the country. And I think that part of the way we beat MAGA and put MAGA into the dustbin of history is by putting much more positive sentiment into our discourse and more honest and truth as well. And so on the economy, I think we've gotten into a crazy place in the economy. There's an argument that the economy is stronger today than it's ever been in the history of the United States. And if you don't believe me, go to the recent Economist article, front cover story in The Economist, not a left-leaning publication, basically wrote an entire cover story about why don't Americans feel better and understand that their economy is the strongest in the world and they're kicking everybody's asses, and that the distance between the United States and everyone else is growing, it's not closing, and that America's in this incredibly strong place. Fareed Zakaria on CNN this weekend did a 6-minute segment all saying exactly the same thing, actually using some of my data about GDP growth and other stuff, making the same argument that this country is arguably in a stronger place economically than it's been in a very long time versus other countries. There's incredible data showing it. And so why don't Americans feel better, right? And I think one of the things I tried to do in this piece, Kathy, is that I do think we're not asking these questions properly. I think that just like what happened with the red wave, where we expanded the data sets that we were looking at to create a more holistic and complete picture of the election, other than just polling, we need to do that in the economy. And what I showed were some examples. The Conference Board, again, not a left-leaning organization, releases an annual survey of worker satisfaction. And in 2022, workers were more satisfied at work than any time ever recorded in history. And that the gap, and there had been a huge leap in worker satisfaction, particularly around work-life balance, for those that could do more remote work and be home with their families more and be more present for their families and commute less. We also have seen, data showing that when you ask people to question the economy, how do you think you're doing versus the economy? 75% of Americans say we're doing fine. And, but they say when they ask that same group says, well, how do you think the economy is doing? 35% say it's fine, right? So I go through in this piece and I show that if you expand the understanding of how to talk about and poll the economy, we're actually ending up in a place where Americans, by many measures, are happier today in their work and feel satisfied with their life than they have in modern American history. And yet all we hear is the negative stuff. We hear about inflation, but we don't hear about rising wages. And I think that the media has become, and I think part of what's happening is that I think negative stories get more clicks and creates more controversy. And I think the entire competition of our national media is driving a degree of negativity that is unwarranted, given the greatness of this country, the incredible achievements and accomplishments of the United States, the continued entrepreneurship and resilience that the American people show. Fareed Zakaria has this data showing that, compared to China, in terms of like looking across industries where the corporate leaders across, 30 different industries, America leads in all of them, right? It's not like 2 or 3, it's all of them. And China's nowhere on almost all of them, right? And so the idea that we're even in a competition with China is almost a joke, right? When you actually look at the data. So my view is this, and I'm answering, is that if I could wave my Harry Potter magic wand and do one thing this year, it would be that all of us together would go to school on this basic economic data, get really fucking loud about it, right? And shout them down and create this overwhelming cascade and chorus of positive information about the United States and Joe Biden and his presidency and the good work of the Democrats to drown out the negative sentiment machine that is dictating the discourse every day. This is critical. And the reason why is that if you think America sucks, then you're willing to do extreme things. If you think America is the greatest country on earth, and we're all lucky to be here and we love our country and we've been very successful, then you have a different relationship to democracy and liberalism and the global and international order. And so what Russia and China and Iran and MAGA want is they want us to think that America's failed. And because that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, that's what enables radicalization and extremism to happen. If America is successful, there's no reason to become an extremist, right? If this is a good country that's most people are getting ahead and living good lives, right? So the way we drain the fuel of extremism is by talking about the greatness and goodness of America and the progress that we've made. This is an urgent task in my view. And it's both truth, but it's also strategic, right? There's strategy here. If we want to save, the reason that extremism has taken over the right was because the establishment of the Republican Party failed. There were 2 failed Bush presidencies in a row. Trump could make the argument that the Republican Party was a failed enterprise. And he was right, when he made that argument. We, on the other hand, have been part of what is maybe the most important political experiment in human history. And what I mean by that is that the world that FDR imagined in his speech, his State of the Union speech in 1941, where he talked about the 4 freedoms and how the world after World War II was going to be based on freedom as this foundational value. That world that we built, the Democratic Party built after World War II, has created a golden age in human history. There's never been a better time to be alive, to have more opportunities in the world than now, and for the people of the world. And we did that. And so it's my view that the Democratic Party is arguably the most consequential political force in all of human history, and that we should be living and connected to the greatness of the work that we've done in order to remind everybody that this global order that we built, we have to preserve it. It's being challenged, it's old and creaky, and it's being challenged by Russia and China and other hostile powers. But we want a world where people are living under democracies and they have unprecedented opportunities and they can live with and love whoever they want and all the kinds of freedoms that we all care about so much. It's all about freedom. They, Greater MAGA, our opponents, want a different world. And so to me, what I think is so central to this moment, and if you look at Joe Biden's 2 early videos, he's basing his whole campaign on more freedom, less freedom. He's going right back to FDR in 1941. It's the foundational value of the modern Democratic Party. And I think it's a very powerful place for us to work from this cycle. I'm very encouraged by the early Biden narrative and story they're telling. I think it's very powerful. It goes right into the emotional core that I think is driving all this volunteerism around the country, which is this fear of MAGA, this fear that democracy is slipping away, that our freedoms are somehow slipping away. And Biden went right there, right? They didn't sugarcoat it. You go look at those videos, it's all about freedom, the threat of MAGA. So I think for us, you know, the Democratic Party was called once before to make sure that freedom and democracy prevailed in the world. We're being called again, and that's why we're all here, I think, Kathy.
That was very inspiring, and I can tell from some of the, I mean, people have been messaging in how excited they are to hear some of this. So are the polls just wrong, or are the polls
Incomplete.
reflecting
Yeah, they're incomplete. I mean,
the loudness?
I think this is an area that I'm still trying to process. And I don't want to tell, you know, I had a long call with somebody today who's just done all these focus groups and was just running all this stuff by me. And I said, you know, I think COVID was this massive disruptive thing that happened to all of us. I think it's like the Depression, right? It created, I mean, what was interesting in the data, if you look on that post that I did, I show that, you know, on satisfaction, like I'm doing okay, 75%. And then the national economy in 2020 bottomed out, and there became this like unbelievably in the data. And Ian, by the way, I appreciate that you're a data visualization guy, because you know, we have to talk. I need help on this because I have to bring some of this more stuff to life. But when you look at that chart, what you see is that COVID was this, we cannot forget about what COVID did to all of us. And COVID was this universal trauma that we all experienced. And it caused, it caused, I think, a loosening of some of the social bonds in the country. And I think what I mean by that is that, you know, people's data, the show on their personal place, they're fine. It didn't change. Their views on whether the economy is doing well dropped like 25 points. And yet the economy has gotten much better and those numbers haven't come back. And to me, there's something deeper happening here that I don't think we've really been able to capture, which is that, you know, I think of my parents who were born during the Depression, and how, you know, Depression babies, right? My father never invested stocks. He never trusted the stock market, right? He viewed it as dangerous. People's lives were dramatically altered during the Depression, and their behavior changed. And I think COVID, we're still stumbling through the other side of COVID, right? There's still a lot of doubt, you know, and fear that we could slip back into something dangerous. We all had moments during COVID, I think all of us did, where we're like, what the fuck is happening? Right? Like, this is crazy. I mean, I had 3 teenagers at home during COVID, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to be the same after that. But it was hard. And I think people, you know, are fearful that this recovery is still, they can't trust it, right? They're still not sure that we're really there. They're still worried. They're also worried about all these crazy MAGA people running around. They're scared of school shootings and getting shot. I mean, there's a lot of reason to be a little bit nervous about things. You know, our democracy almost tumbled 2 years ago. And so I think that this is why Biden, you know, the Biden people, I don't know, are on, you know, he's not a loud guy, right? And I think it's one of the reasons we have to be loud, because he's never going to be loud, and we have to make up for some of that. But, you know, this sort of slow, steady, workhorse, not show horse president that we have, it may be what really is needed now, right? To sort of calm the temperature down, to not be rushing to do crazy social media every day, right? To create this contrast between their performative bullshit and, you know, a guy whose experience is going to work every day, putting points on the board for the country. It's really interesting about the way Biden, for example, managed this whole debt ceiling thing. He was basically invisible during all of it. A lot of Democrats didn't like that, right? There's been a lot of criticism of him being too dialed down, but I think that they didn't want to associate him with craziness, right? They didn't want him to look like he was connected to crazy things. They want him to look like the dad who's like telling everybody everything's going to be okay, you know? And I think there's some genius into what they've done with him. I mean, I'm not sure I would have done it. I'm more of Clinton guy who was a loud guy and talked all the time and gave speeches all the time. But Biden it's possible, for those of you who studied American history, you know that there's a character in our history in the founding days in the 18th century. And our founding fathers were very schooled in Roman history, right? I live in Washington, the whole city looks like Rome. And there's a historical general in Rome called Cincinnatus, a guy named Cincinnatus. And the officers who fought in the revolution formed an association called the Sons of Cincinnatus. I mean, Cincinnatus was such an inspiring figure, and Cincinnatus in Roman history was a general who retired and went to his farm. And when the Republic was threatened, he came out of retirement and saved the Republic, and then went back to his farm afterwards. And he became, because so many of the founding fathers were farmers who were sort of coming into public life and then wanting to go back into their private lives. Cincinnatus became this very inspiring figure. To me, there's a lot of Cincinnatus in Joe Biden, right? That he's a guy who sort of came out of retirement, who was, who decided the country and the Republic was under threat. And he's serving nobly, during this time, and then wanting to not go back to the farm, but to go to Rehoboth, Delaware, his beach house someday, and hang out with all his grandkids and just be around his family, and I think it may be that we got historically lucky that he decided to do that. And it's so check out the story of Cincinnatus. It's just an interesting, fun American, a foundational myth of this country that was very inspiring to the founding fathers and to the revolution that happened.
Well, since you've talked about Joe Biden, some of the some of the questions we got in advance were coming from two different directions. One being, he's so old. How can we be electing? How will we reelect somebody who is that age? Or how can we make sure that he is elected? Isn't he the strongest person who could run? Can you address that?
Yeah, listen, I think every candidate has a balance sheet, assets and liabilities, right? And Joe Biden's age is both an asset and a liability. His asset is that he's also experienced, and he's been able to do remarkable things, in a very short period of time. And, we had 10 years of legislating in 21 and 2022 and did things that are going to create prosperity for the country for a generation. And now he was able to land this, we hope, the debt ceiling crisis, which was a legitimate crisis in the country that he was able to resolve in a very diplomatic way. And I think that we have to view his age now as something that's both an asset and a liability, and not allow the right to make it only a liability, right? I think this is really important because he's demonstrated that at this point, it's, for the country, it's been far more of an asset than a liability, right? We've benefited from his experience and his calmness and his knowing the business, right, really well in a time of enormous complexity for the country. Coming out of COVID, the country was, our capital was attacked, our democracy was attacked, unprecedented way. You think about the things Biden's had to manage, the Russia invasion, Ukraine invasion. These are hugely complicated, difficult things, which he's been able to, it's been bumpy, right? Not everything's bumpy in life. Nothing's on a straight line in our lives. And he's been able to get us to the other side, a lot of this stuff. And it's been in large part because he's the most experienced person that's ever become president and in our history. And so the second thing is that I think that what we are going to have to do is to talk, as I talked about the economy, is that we have got to do a better job at explaining how much better things are. I mean, I really do believe as an incumbent party, the first measure is, hey, have you made our lives better? And that's a threshold thing that we just have to all bear down on and really talk and come up with our own raps, right, about how much better things are. That's a lot of what I talk about in Hopia, by the way. And so if you become a subscriber, you're going to get inundated with this kind of stuff. And then also, though, which if you look at the early ads and the early videos, they've also, though, started laying out the next agenda, right? And he's talking about finishing the job. It's not, here's all the good things we've done, but we still have these other things we need to go do. And if you support me, not only are you rewarding me for doing a good job and making the country better, But I've still got these things I want to do. And I think they were very smart to really focus on these things I want to do, because in essence, if Biden wasn't emphasizing that, it would be easy to sort of start saying that he understands he's at the end of the road, right? And that what he's saying is, I'm not. I still got fight in me, and there's a bunch of things I really want to go do. And if you support me, here are the things that we can do together in the next administration. So I think that, and look, you're seeing ads, right? When I give these talks to groups, many of the states that I speak to aren't seeing the ads. They're not part of the battleground that you're in, and you're going to be seeing all this stuff. And what's important is the campaign is on, right? It started, and one of the things you should be talking to the Democratic Party about, those of you who do partisan work, Kathy, sorry about that, but one of the things that the family should be talking about is, okay, the campaign's on, what do we do? And what I've told the campaign is what everyone should do is go register young people. Because we know from data now that when the turnout rate of young people who are registered is equal to the turnout rate of older people. It's just that large numbers of young people are not registered. And the fact they're not registered is not their fault, it's our fault, right? We have to take responsibility for this. And as Democrats, a couple things about this thing about youth voting, because this comes up all the time. We're one of the only countries in the world where you have to register to vote. I mean, in virtually every country, if you turn 18, you can use your ID and use vote. And in most countries also, every election is a national election, meaning that it doesn't matter where you live, there's an election happening for you. And so you're seeing ads and you're in, people are voting and debating. And, we have this crazy system where, first of all, you have to do this thing that almost no other country forces you to do, which is take an additional step to vote beyond just being yourself, right? And also that the only time you can't register in many states is the time of maximum interest, which is right before an election, which is a tool designed to prevent people from voting, right? And then the third thing about young people is that because voting in the US is so location based, we know from sociological research that people don't start voting a lot and frequently until they become settled in a place. And that's because in the United States, our voting isn't national, it's place-based. And so Laura Brill, who I would encourage all of you to get to know, who runs an organization called the Civic Center, who I've become a big promoter of, is launched a C3 national campaign to try to get every high school kid registered before they graduate. And I think this is an incredibly noble and important project, because we know from research that if you can catch people when they're 18 and they're still connected to a place, right? Like they're registering in the town where they went to high school, right? Once you're registered, you vote, you vote, right? It's that threshold point of getting people to register. And if we can create a national culture in our schools, where not only are kids doing community service work, which is now a fairly universal requirement in most high schools, but also that there are voter registration campaigns in all those schools, because 35 out of 50 states, and I just don't know Arizona off the top of my head, you can register a voter when they turn 17 or earlier. So my daughter, for example, who's 17 in DC, could have registered when she turned 16. She can pre-register. She didn't know this. None of her friends knew this. And because of that, it means that, one of the things you could do is adopt these programs that she has for high schools to build, voter registration campaigns in the high schools. And think about it from a second, if you think about it, right? Not only does virtually every high school have a community service requirement of some kind, and meaning that there's staff inside the high school creating community service, civic engagement activities, right? But also there are Democratic clubs and Republican clubs in most high schools. And so the Democratic clubs in every high school in Arizona, where there is one, could adopt, a 80% goal of registration before people leave. That's something that we could get done in the next 6 months if we really set our mind to it. If the governor got behind it, if the congressional delegations and the senators got behind it in Arizona, we could, by the end of this year, have legitimate, serious voter registration campaigns operating in most of the high schools in Arizona, and it would be deeply powerful. And as part of your mission, civic engagement, and I should say that I was on the board of Tisch College at Tufts for 15 years, where I went, which is, in my view, the leading academic institution looking at civic engagement in the United States. These kinds of programs, we know, create also competition with high schools. Competitions will start competing with each other on how many of their students are registered to vote before they graduate. And so this is I'll connect you, you may know, yeah, thank you, Kathy, for putting it in. You should have Laura in one of your groups. She's amazing. And she's exploding. Like, Laura's becoming big and powerful and important. And she may have already spoken to you. I could be just
We
repeating.
actually we have set up an appointment to speak to them in
Great.
a week or two.
She knows I'm her promoter. I'm her agent out there. Anyway, what else?
Oh, and thanks to everybody who's put in the chat that the House has passed the debt limit bill.
Yep.
So that is good news.
Last thing on Biden, I just want to say that I think the campaign is off, as I was saying earlier. I think they're off to a really strong start in two ways. One is they're doing what I think is the most critical thing that we're thinking about as a family this year, which is that I think that, the last three elections, we've performed at the upper end of what was possible for us in three consecutive elections. We won by 8.5 points in 2018. We unseated a president and won the Senate in 2020. Unseating a president in our system is not easy. And then in 2022, we had what may have been more amazing performance than we even had in 2018 and 2020, based on the fundamentals and the dynamics. And for me, going forward, what I think we have to be thinking about it's all about expansion now and growing. And it's about what I call getting to 55. And what getting to 55 it's a sensibility that Republicans are, as they grow ever more extreme, are making available to us demographic and geographic and rhetorical opportunities that we can seize that were unavailable to us before. And as I said earlier, we got to 59% in Colorado, 57 in Pennsylvania. We just got to 56 in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. But we also just flipped two heavily Republican cities in Colorado Springs and in Jacksonville. And I was very involved in the Jacksonville race and raised a lot of money and helped Donna Deegan win there. And that's an example of expansion. We just took real estate away from them. We took away the Wisconsin Supreme Court seat. And I think we need to be relentlessly focused now on growing. And so from 1992 to 2004, we averaged 47% of the vote in national presidential elections. And I and a bunch of other people identified two growing parts of the electorate, Hispanics and millennials at that point, and said that there's a big historic opportunity here to go into this world and grow our coalition. And you began to see that in the 2006 election. Obama adopted this as a strategy. And in the four elections since 2004, we've averaged 51% of the vote. We've jumped 4 points. The last time we averaged 51% over four elections was in FDR's 4 terms. So we're performing at a better level, the presidential level, than we have since the 1930s and 1940s. You in Arizona, right, just did something we haven't had since 1951 or whatever the number is, right? When Joe Biden won Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico in 2020, it was the first time we had won those 4 states at a presidential level since 1940, right? And so it's about expansion now, and it's about we got from 47 to 51, now we need to go from 51 to 55. If we can get to 55 and beat them by 10 points, I mean, look what you did with Katie Hobbs, right? Nobody thought that was going to happen. If we can do the unimaginable, which we just did in 2022, and we just did in Colorado Springs, and we just did in Wisconsin, and we just did in Jacksonville, if we can get to 55, then we can crush MAGA. And we can start to loosen this dark grip on the Republican Party. And I know that you're trying to flip the legislature there. This is exactly the way you should be thinking. It's about expansion and growth. It's about people being sick and tired. We've litigated MAGA now in the battleground 3 consecutive elections. People know the danger of MAGA. The Republicans are getting worse, not better. DeSantis is an affirmation that MAGA is a threat that's going to outlive Trump, and that it's metastasizing and becoming arguably more virulent and more dangerous right now. And so, we need to not just win, we need to win big to crush them and to start to make MAGA go away, right? Because the only way MAGA goes away is if Republicans view it as a political loser. And in your state, MAGA may go away because people like Carrie Lake are so horrible that they're driving everybody away from the Republican Party. And we have really good candidates, who are creating a contrast. But we've got to be thinking a lot about expansion and growth this cycle. And so the Biden campaign is now not just operating in the core battleground, but they're running ads in North Carolina and Florida. They're trying to expand and grow, really important. And the other way they expanded and grew is rhetorically and symbolically. If you look at their early media, it's about freedom, patriotism, optimism, flags, right? Americana. This is stuff we traditionally more associate with Republicans. And so we're also claiming that space and taking that back from them. It's all about growth now. And I would also argue that, as you know, in your state, that we do need to thank the Never MAGA, Never Trumpers, right? I mean, in many of the states where we did well this last cycle, there was this organized group of Republicans who broke from their party in a public way. And I hope that whatever you can do to make sure that they know that you're grateful for their courage and their willingness, Liz Cheney helped you in Arizona, right? We need to make sure the Never Trump or Never MAGAs, we're in a temporary coalition with them. And we need to make them feel welcome in our family and have a seat at our table, at our dinner table for them if they want to come over and hang out. It's really important, because imagine doing what they did. Imagine publicly breaking from your party, from your friends. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And we need that part of the movement to keep growing. The stronger that Liz Cheney wing of the Republican Party gets, the more likely it is that we win. And so this is an important part of our coalition now, as much, in terms of the other areas where we can grow, right? Hispanics and young people. I think the politics of abortion is giving us unbelievable amounts of opportunities to grow our vote around abortion. And then the Never MAGA, Never Trumpers, I think, are just really, really important for us to. I've become very good friends with Bill Kristol. I've reached out to Reed Galen and a lot of these other folks, who we all see on TV, who are former Republicans. And I've just told them, thank you, right? Like, I'm just so grateful for what you've done and recognize the courage it's taken. I hope processes like that are happening in Arizona as well, because these people deserve, the old McCain Republicans, right, deserve a lot of credit, for breaking from a party that they've been part of their whole lives. It's not an easy thing to do.
Mhm. Wow, that is a lot. So I want to jump ahead to some questions that are more Arizona centric, that we want to make sure we get in. And I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I get it right. So Arizona has trended blue in the last 3 election cycles due to poor Republican candidates. You just referred to that. And there isn't a lot you can tell Arizona about MAGA candidates. In our legislature, we have somebody who attended the January 6th insurrection. We have somebody who ran a troll farm, and they are heads of committees in our legislature. So that is very disconcerting. Anyway, organizers are starting to burn out, and our most recently skewed redistricting is posing a challenge to our work to finally flip the state legislature. We are 1 seat away in both chambers. So Democrats haven't been in charge of the state legislature since 1966.
Amazing.
Can you give us hope and energy for the next cycle? Are we going in the right direction?
Yeah, listen, I just want to, it's a great way to end, because I think that, I got into this in 2002. I introduced bilingual polling to the Democratic Party. And in 2000, with Bob Menendez and my organization, NDN, and Bob Menendez did the first bilingual poll of Hispanic voters ever in the history of the Democratic Party in 2002. And then Ken Salazar and I, the former senator from Colorado, we introduced Spanish language advertising to the Democratic Party in that election cycle in a Senate race and in Colorado. And in 2004, my organization raised $6 million and ran ads in Spanish in Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, and Florida. We ended up going dark after Labor Day in Arizona. It was painful to me, but the election was slipping away there. And so, when in 2004, when Bush won, the last time a Republican won the popular vote in the Electoral College, Bush won Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico. Republicans controlled 5 out of the 8 Senate seats and 14 out of the 21 House seats. So the Southwest in 2004 was lean red or Republican. And, all these years later, right, we've won Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, the presidential level for the first time since 1940. There are, of those 4 states, there are no Republican senators. I don't know what cinema is, right? But there's no Republican senators anymore. There were 5, and now there's 0. So our margin in the Senate is entirely due to the good work of the Democratic Party in the Southwest. And in the House, I think the number, and I have to now go back, I realized I have to go back and check this. I think we control 14 of the 23 House seats. So we've gained 7 House seats in the region, obviously not in Arizona last cycle, but, and so that's also gave us the House, was the margin in the House last cycle. So part of the argument I want to make to all of you, if you look at 2004, there are only 6 states that flipped from Republican to Democrat since 2004. And it's the 4 Southwestern states plus Virginia and Georgia. And so you're part of a region of the country that has been the single biggest success story of the Democratic Party in the last 25 years, period, over and out. The growth, the flipping of the Southwest has been the most consequential political event in the Democratic Party. And of that, the hardest and most difficult was flipping Arizona, right? That was the one that was always going to be demographically, the data, everything else was always going to be the hardest. We had the least amount of infrastructure. McCain, the Flake McCain Republican brand was so strong and powerful, right? And they were good senators, by the way. We all wish we had Republicans like that now. And so what we've done in this work in identifying, because remember what's happened with the Hispanic vote, and let me just make sure people understand this, is that there was all this talk about how we'd fallen back a little bit with Hispanics, but a bigger slice, a slightly smaller slice of a bigger pie still means more pie. And what I mean by that, in 2004, our national margin with Hispanic voters, meaning how many more did we get than Republicans, was about 700,000. In 2020, it was probably about 5 million, right? Because what's happening is that, even though the Hispanic population is growing so fast, that even if we get 62% instead of 64%, we're still netting more votes, right? On the other side, we're gaining votes, even with a little bit less. And so this story of the Democratic Party identifying this Hispanic opportunity, which Bob Menendez and Ken Salazar were critical in doing along with me and others 20 years ago, has helped create, one of the most important events in modern American history. And I still, I wrote a piece in 2018 saying Trump has a problem, that I predicted, I sort of looked at all the Arizona stuff and said the Republicans have a big problem coming in Arizona. And we always knew that Arizona was there demographically, right? Like the numbers underneath were always there, but there needed to be the effort that you all made and the good candidates who were able to tip it and to create this opportunity. I mean, I literally went to the Obama campaign. I had my one day in the Obama campaign where I was allowed to fly there to Chicago and talk to everybody. And in my meeting with the senior team, I said, I have one wish, which is I want you to play in Arizona because we can win there. We've just never made the investment there. And of course they didn't do it, by the way. And it was, but I had seen it in 2004. I had seen the data. I could see what, I knew what was happening. It was a chronic underinvestment, and the investment we made in Hispanic advertising and Spanish language communications drove Hispanic turnout numbers through the roof throughout the Southwest in a very short period of time. So I just want to say, to conclude, to sort of, this is my last point to all of you, is that, just as a national Democrat, what you have done in these last several elections is unbelievable. It's arguably the single most important, or the single biggest achievement of the Democratic Party in the last few election cycles, because it was the hardest. I can get in trouble. This may go on, on the internet, but I think it's certainly equal to, if not harder than Georgia, right? I mean, we could debate whether Georgia was harder, and you had this weird thing where they had to run again every 2 years, right, in both states. But the performance of Kelly this last cycle, the performance of Hobbs, right? What you've done now is you've now connected lots of people to the Democratic Party, and they voted for you once, maybe twice. You get them one more time this time, and they're going to become Democrats. And you did all that. All of you did that. And yeah, the National Party helped. We finally came in and did our part. But as you all know, this was the revolution that's taking place in Arizona. It was a bottom-up one. It was from all of you. I mean, Ruben Gallego is a very dear friend of mine, and I've featured Ruben many times talking about all the work that he did in the Hispanic community in Arizona. And I would also be remiss not to say that I know there's a competitive House race, but Andre Cherney is one of my closest friends in the world. And I love him like a brother, and I hope he's the nominee, and I hope he's the next congressman. And I know not everybody may be there. But I think, you've done remarkable things, and I'm really here in part just to say thank you. I don't believe that people are burning out. I think that there are two things going on. One is the unemployment rate is so low that there's a lot of job opportunities where people can get paid real money to go work. And so the competition for getting kind of, low cost grassroots organizing, it's very hard right now, right? Because of just the strong economy. And it's going to be hard for the next year and a half in theory. But I can tell you that since the beginning of the year, this is probably the 20th group like this I've spoken to. I do 2 to 3 a week. No one has stopped. You're all still going. You're all here tonight. We had 200 people here tonight, right? I just spoke at a house in Kensington, Maryland a couple of weeks ago. There were 150 people there on a beautiful Sunday afternoon to hear me, right? I'm not Mark Kelly. And so I think that part of the story here I want to conclude with is that our democracy has become so much stronger. If we get through the other side of this and MAGA is defeated and we get it back a more center-right political party on the other side, the activity of regular people, because our politics is built on the energy of the grassroots of regular citizens. It's where the money's coming from. It's where the volunteerism is coming from. Their party is built on the wealth of 200 oligarchs. And what we're doing in building these massive campaigns and bringing all these people in to go canvassing and touching them, we're making our democracy much stronger. Right? We're going to come out of this as a stronger democracy than we were, because when we were challenged and when people had to rise up, they did. And so I just will conclude by saying, listen, we have to just keep going, right? We understand the gravity of the moment. We can't, if I can say one last thing, is I do this talk in my talks where I'll conclude with this, is that just go with me here for a second. Joe Biden has been a good president. The country is better off. The Democratic Party is strong. No commas, no howevers, no buts. And what I mean by that is that every time that you then qualify these statements, like we are better on the economy than they are, speak in a declarative sentence, let it end. I was an English major at Tufts, right? Let it end. Joe Biden has been a good president. No qualifiers. And the reason why is what we do as Democrats is we say, but there's this and there's that. And every time we do that, we bring in Republican arguments into the discourse. We do MAGA's work for them. And what we need to be doing is being loud and proud about who we are, what we've done, our president, the Democratic Project, the work you've been able to do here. And for us to get more connected to going on offense, telling our story, being confident and proud of this party that we're part of the work that you've done, the achievements you have, and not live in their darkness. When we go into their darkness and the fear that we all have, the reason we're here is because we're scared. There's a piece of us that's scared about what's happening. That fear becomes paralyzing, right? And so you asked me about hope and hopium. The reason we're all here is that we don't want to externalize our anxiety and be paralyzed by it. We want to do something about it. And that's why we're all here, right? That's why I'm here with you, because me being here with you helps me channel my own anxiety and fear about the future, and to know that we're doing good work together. So part of what my ask is, if I can make an ask in addition to subscribing to Hopium, is to learn how to speak in positive declarative sentences and to not do MAGA's work for them. We are an incredible carrier of their message for them. We are defensive in the way that we approach things. We don't state our case. And so in that economic piece you were referring to, what I argue is the way we should be talking about the economy right now is our recovery from COVID is the best of any advanced economy in the world. The American economy is historically strong. We're seeing in the growth is continuing and inflation is too high. And we have to learn how to say all those positive things first and then talk about inflation instead of spending all of our time and talking about the pain and the hurt. Because if you live in the pain and the hurt, you're then doing MAGA's work for them, right? You're taking their arguments and making them central to your arguments. We have to make our arguments. We have Stockholm syndrome a little bit as Democrats, right? Like we have been so beaten down by the right-wing noise machine that we make the right-wing noise machine's arguments for them every day and let them live in our head. You need to get them out of your head, right? There's a little bit of Ted Lasso and all this stuff, right? And that we need to go and be on offense and go positive on all this. You've already done that in Arizona, and I'm so proud of all of you. It's really an honor to be here. I can't tell you how much of my adult life has been about selling this opportunity we had in the Southwest, a part of the country that I love and my family's, from, my wife's family's from. And, you guys did it. And we got another election. We got to go do it again. And let me know how I can help.
Well, thank you. This is what we try to do all the time, is to encourage people to look at the long game, to continue working, because it is going to be a long project. And the one ask I have for you is, for everyone that you speak to, please tell them to invest in Arizona. And also please tell them to invest down ballot in Arizona, because state legislatures are where a lot of the radicalism is taking root, and we are only one seat away.
Well,
So,
the youth stuff for you really, really matters, right?
Yes.
And that's where we're going to grow everywhere. And I know you have a youth coordinator as part of your leadership team, and I think it's smart. And I just want to say, Kathy, and to Trisha, and to Laura, and to is it Brandy? Did I get it
Brandy.
right? Yeah, and to Ian, and there's one more, and I can't read my own handwriting. Melinda, just thanks for what you're doing, and listen, you're doing great, but we still have more to do. And then now let's go flip the legislature. And I would make sure that you are working with your state party and the early Biden team to start making sure the coordinated campaign is set up, and that you lobby very, very hard to make sure Biden team understands these state legislative opportunities, and this becomes central to their project. I mean, this right now, time is our friend in the election, right? And the woman who was appointed to be the campaign manager, Julie Chavez Rodriguez, a very dear friend of mine. Her grandfather was Cesar Chavez. She grew up as an organizer, right? Her family are organizers. Jen O'Malley Dillon is an organizer. Roger Lau, who's running the strategy to reelect, they're all organizers. These are all organizers. They all grew up as organizers. Julie, winning in Arizona and Nevada is very, very important to the campaign manager. And I think that you should be maximally aggressive as a family, making big asks for the Biden campaign, because there's really only at this point 5 or 6 states. There aren't 8 or 9, and you're one of them. You're going to be right at the center of everything the whole way, and they want to go big. They want to blow it out, and they want to leave you with a majority in the legislatures. That's to everyone's advantage. And I think you're going to see that the campaign is very open to these conversations and wants to get the work done. That's why they turned the campaign on. They could have turned the campaign on at the end of the summer, but they didn't. They turned it on now. And so this big machine that we got to go build, it's begun. And it gets, and it's what I call a virtuous cycle of participation, right? The earlier you build this machine, the bigger it gets. They've turned it on. So you need to be loud with them about what you need them to do together in a partnership with all of you to do what you got to do this cycle. We got some congressional seats we got to win, right? We've got the crazy Senate race that's going to happen. We've got the state legislative seats, and we got to pick up at least 2 House seats there this cycle, right? At least 2 in Arizona. It's important.
We're working on it.
I know,
can assure you
but we got to
that.
do it. We got to more than hopium. We just got to do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so thank you, everybody. I'm going to go. I'm really just grateful to
Okay.
be here. It's fun to be with all of you and just really proud of your work. And I just want to be a partner in any way I can, Kathy, as we go forward. And thank you.
Thank you so
for
much. We
care, everybody.
appreciate it. And if people could stay on for just another minute, Laura, there were a few things you wanted to cover as well.
Yes, so I have some exciting announcements about what is coming up for civic engagement beyond voting. So happy hours are canceled for June unless the legislature does something noteworthy, which is always a possibility. We are going to be featuring some standalone workshops, our Civics 101 workshop, which features kind of local government from your school board all the way up to the state legislature, as well as our messaging and letters to the editor. So keep an eye out for those. We do have 2 firm dates, and I believe these will be going into the chat for our legislative wrap-ups to share, kind of what happened this session and where we go from here. Those are going to be on June 25th and June 29th. Hopefully the links are heading into the chat. And then this Saturday, there is the Rural Summit, which we're very excited about. So this event is free. It's for organizers and activists in Arizona who want to learn more about messaging, fighting disinformation, and really the basics of local government. Keynote speaker will be Attorney General Chris Mays, who is doing great work. She got her start in rural Arizona and is very proud to support rural engagement. So this would be a fantastic opportunity, even if you're not working in rural, still to do that hard work of moving Arizona forward, which we know will take all of us. So those were my announcements. Thank you everyone so much for joining, and Kathy, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, well, thank you all. And yes, we will be releasing a recording of this. We'll put it on our YouTube channel and we'll send out a link to that in our emails. So please watch our emails. We'll still be doing them every weekend. Even if we don't have a weekly or anything to report, we will at least keep that up. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening.